Modern rationalism, modern man, modern reason, ends in madness. Today, we are faced with the question, are we the victims of chance? We cannot answer that question in the negative. We would be tormented by a positive answer were it not for the possibility of utter madness. And we find this in Nietzsche and contemporary science, what is called contemporary science. What do our intellectuals tell us? Are we free? Well, we cannot say unless we identify freedom with the self-positing of the ego, of the self, of the individual, the modern individual. The modern will, modern reason, has to proclaim itself, and in its proclamation it sees itself, it sees its freedom. But this proclamation is, as Nietzsche saw, an act of the will, the ego's will. Now, Nietzsche thought that, or assumed, or taught that the proclamation of freedom, which is at once freedom itself, is representative of the act of creation, a primordial act of creation. There is no reason to it. It is primordial. Now, Nietzsche, as is known, ends in madness. We can brush off his biographical predicament as being completely accidental. It is the product of chance. He was a victim of chance. But what does this say about his freedom? What does it say about his lesson? It says that in spite of what he said, he remained a victim of chance. No, it was not the result of sheer chance. It was the result of an act of the will. It is the result of autonomous reason, modern autonomous reason. Now, what is this reason? It is a reason that obscures earlier rationalism, medieval rationalism specifically. It is an irony that modern rationalism speaks of, and this after Petrarca, but Petrarca was not referring to the medieval period as a whole. It is an irony that modern rationalism speaks of the Middle Ages as an age of obscurantism. For modern rationalism obscures medieval rationalism. What is distinctive about modern rationalism, and what is distinctive about medieval rationalism? Modern rationalism establishes itself on the basis of a Cartesian ego's sense of certainty. The ego is proclaimed, it proclaims itself, it is a place of proclamation, of autonomy, free will. Free will, autonomous of any higher authority. Freedom is in the workings of this ego. This ego alone is frail, so he needs to collaborate with other egos, and so We need to establish a world of freedom that is based on this principle of the ego. In the 19th century, we have people such as Giacomo Leopardi, who speak of modern man as being essentially an egoist, and the modern world as being a world of egoism, based on the principle of egoism. What this means is that the whole modern world is based on the notion that we are autonomous centers of, well, freedom, which is a will, which turns out to be a will to power because it has nowhere else to go. Self-affirmation, sense of certainty, and truth. Where is truth in all of this? Truth is the world that reflects our sense of certainty. Truth is the world we're building. We're building truth. Knowledge, again, is power, following the Baconian formula, which is to say that as we know, we are empowered, or we find empowerment in our world, the world that we are building. To know is to make. The Hobbesian principle, you know in the making. When you make something, you know it, and nothing else to it. How do you know that? Well, Hobbes does not really face this fundamental question. Now, what's wrong with all of this? Well, what's wrong with it is that we end up with a world that bespeaks the ego, that reminds us of this ego and of its emptiness. The world becomes unlivable, unbearable. And the result of this is the self-destruction of modern reason, which we have seen prophesized and witnessed to in the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. But we see this carried out thoroughly today. Why is this? Why should we build this world for the ego? What is this ego? The proclamation in which it finds itself. Is it itself the product of chance? Driven by the compulsion, yes, this force, mechanical force, we entrust ourselves to a proclamation. We are free. Hence the madness. I identify myself with X, Y, and Z. I identify as God. Why not? Why not indeed? If technology allows me to be persuasive, to persuade others, if we all agree in our world that we are gods, and if what is outside of our world does not contradict us, if nature remains silent as far as we are concerned, as far as we're concerned, then why not? We are gods. We know what we know. Who is to disprove us? If we manage to know within a world in which we need no longer hear the voice of doubt. Nature might be telling us loud and clear, you're wrong, you don't know, you're ignorant, you fool, you're deluded, you are the product of chance, you are the victim of chance. We don't listen. Why don't we listen? Because we have built walls, we have built a prison for ourselves, a kingdom in which we are slaves, in which we forget our own condition as slaves. We can pretend to be free. We can pretend to be God, insofar as we have hidden in a place that is without freedom, without God. The Tower of Babel is a paradigm for this. In the biblical story, we see a warning. The story tells us about an impossibility. This tower is impossible. You cannot build it. They try. They fail. Today we're at it systematically, not metaphorically, not in stories. We are existentially dedicated to this building. Who are we? If we are not the products of chance, if we are not the victims of chance, what are we? An act of self-determination. Where does this come out of? How is this possible? How is it made possible? And, well, biblical accounts suggest a betrayal. Now, the fallen angel betrays. When he betrays, he becomes proud. He becomes autonomous. Our autonomy presupposes a betrayal. Of what? Of a mandate? Let us say that we are given. We, as a place, as a faculty, we are given. As a mandate, we are given. By what? By whom? What is it that gives us, that somehow produces us? Are we produced by mindless forces that ultimately leave us exposed to this threatening suspicion that we are the victims of chance? Or are we originally given by what all things yearn for? Now, in the modern world, we are assuming, we are taught to assume that all things strive for survival into the story as individuals. There is something to it, but this proposition is derivative of a classical one. Yes, all finite beings seek to conserve their being. Now, this formulation is not the end of the story. Why is it that we conserve our being as finite beings? We conserve it, if not in the modern mechanistic sense, we conserve it insofar as our finite being reflects or imitates the perfection of being, or its own perfection. What is the perfection of being? The perfection of being is the coincidence, the perfect identity, we could say, of form and content. We exist, therefore, our form does not coincide simply with our content. We could say that we have a mind as a form and a body, feelings, as content. And they don't coincide. We can think something and then do something else. We're striving for not our ego, our egoic sense of certainty alone, formal ego. We're striving for more, for the perfection of that ego. And the perfection of the ego, where is it? Is it in the universal global planetary society of egos? Or is it elsewhere? Well, the modern answer, of course, is familiar to us. But it is based on the notion that this ego is primordial. Although imperfect, it is simply a formal entity. It lacks content. It feeds of the world. It is nourished by the world. It brings the world within itself to transform itself, to convert into a full-fledged universal ego, which is the universal society, the universal prison, as we've seen, in which there is no freedom and there is no God. So man exists at any rate, and that means that in man we do not find, as man, we do not find this coincidentia, in Latin, this perfect coinciding of form and content. We strive for something that we do not already incarnate. We suffer, we seek solutions that we do not readily possess. If not nominally, we might think about it, and we might have some concept of a solution, but we don't. We need to realize them, as we say. Can we? Should we? Now, what is the medieval, shall we say, classical even, alternative, rationalism, and conception of freedom, ultimately, that is obscured by modern rationalism? The medieval alternative sees freedom as stemming from the perfection of being. That's quite simple. I am not free as an autonomous ego. That ego is a mask, no more than a mask. Freedom is absolutely a function of the perfection of being. It depends upon it. I am not free, and I don't exist at all, in fact. If not, as a being, even a mask, that is called into being. Called into being by the perfection of being. We could see this in terms of light and dark. The light reaches out, the light of the perfection of being reaches out into the dark. And now it constitutes, it establishes its presence in the dark. Man is the presence of the light in the dark. Now, this presence is to gather itself back into the light, into the perfection of being. In doing so, it bears witness to the perfection of being in the dark. The possibility, evidently, is there for a fall. Whereas the darkness cannot absorb the light, nevertheless, a semblance of the light can be established in the dark. A pretense, a reification, a copy, a mechanical copy, a shadow, perhaps, yes, we could say in Platonic terms, of the light in the dark, pretending to be building something like the perfection of being. We're building something that is like God in the dark. Now this possibility of finite being abandoning its reason of being, its raison d'être, as the French say, is always open. Always open. And we can be enthusiastic about it. We can be totalitarian about it. Or, as in the case of many young people, or even not so young, we can doubt it. We can be even quite disenchanted. We can, well, in some cases, we can say we can be depressed. We can fall into despair and say, well, is this not all an illusion? And what lies behind this illusion? Am I really free? What is it that moves me? Are we victims of chance? So, between despair and utter madness, this is the condition of modern man. Medieval and classical in general, rationalism offers an alternative that is obscured by modern rationalism. Modern rationalism in this respect is obscurantist. The modern Enlightenment is obscuring a medieval Enlightenment. Well, you say, well, the medievals had superstitions. Modern rationalism begins with a mockery of everything that came before that. We should get back to the sources, study them, possibly in the original language, and see for ourselves, expose ourselves. Is this not an act of the will? Whose will? We're called to respond. We're called to retrace ourselves, our existence. The contents of our experience back to the perfection of being. This is reason. A mandate. It is not my power, autonomous power. I don't decide where to go. No. I am a mask of a gathering. This gathering is the gathering of God. It is at once the gathering of God back into himself. From God, back to God. Through God. Trinity. Who am I? I am the mask. If really we must say I, if this I must be posited, then this I is the mask of an activity. And now, modern man, of course, represents this autonomy. The I absorbs, hence the pretense, absorbs the light, a glimmer of light, brings the light into the dark, and says, when the light falls into the dark, the possibility arises for this I to come up. It says, I, the autonomous I. It's an illusion. An illusion. We are illusions. We are masks, illusions. We're not real. But there's something real about us, where we come from. So we are masks. We are faces. We do not exist at all, aside from what sustains us. And what sustains us as these illusions, as these shadows. Marionettes, if you like. What sustains us is the activity of God, reason, reflection, that gathers the light back into its perfection. As the light comes into the dark, gives itself out of itself, it gathers itself back into itself. Medieval rationalism is thus not anthropocentric, if not in this poetic sense, where man is the face of God's providence. And this is the heart of the Platonic Renaissance. It is theocentric, and the Renaissance remains theocentric. The Platonic Renaissance, that of Dante, Leonardo, Michelangelo, rather than Machiavelli. It is theocentric in the respect that reason belongs fundamentally to the perfection of being.